part 44 of Don't Say Schwarzenegger. In this part, I'm going to be covering Maurice Driz's 2018 Deposition. I also wanted to say thank you so much, everybody, for checking in and your patience and everything, because I took 2 weeks off from my series because reading impact statements it kind of just knocks me to the floor, especially reading, a misleading impact statement, I guess you could call it, a character letter that I read in my previous part that Annabella Driz wrote for Sean Driz, where she paints the defendants as the victims. It kind of it threw me off reading it on camera. So thank you, everybody, for being patient with me. So right off the bat in the depositions, the attorneys ask Maurice if he's ever been deposed before. And he says yes, like one other time in 2016, so 2 years before this deposition. And he said it was dismissed. Now that's interesting because during this time was when the entire lawsuit, the other lawsuit that Alberto and Maurice Driz were being sued for schmexual battery of an underage girl, which they lost. So I'm wondering when he says it's dismissed, if he's talking about that deposition from that case, because if he's referring to that, then, well, that's perjury. Next, he goes over the basic stuff. He and his brother Alberto were born in Argentina, but they moved in their early teens, I think, to the United States, and they both attended Beverly Hills High School. Next, Maurice talks about his work resume between high school and 2012 when he began working with Blaze Pizza. And he says that he owned a company called Lucky Knits. And I looked it up, and Lucky Knits, it's a company that does fabric dyeing, apparel manufacturing, knitting, and laundry services, which I thought was ironic. A Driz, laundering things. Maurice also talks about a company that he worked for, his dad's company, and it's called, according to him, it's called Driz Knitting Mills. So apparently he's been in the knitting industry. These guys that have been charged with GBI felonies, get caught with illegal white powder and a stolen loaded pew-pew. They're in the knitting industry. Next, Maurice is asked about his living situation. And remember, they're claiming to be broke and indigent. And so he says that after the night in 2015 where we almost lost our lives, he says that he moved into a condo that his parents owned. And he refuses to answer any questions about the sale of said condo. When he's asked about his current address, refuses to answer that question as well. And he says, "You can send me all those questions by mail and I will answer. You've been doing that very well." He's got such a weird, aggressive, passive-aggressive tone throughout the entire deposition, by the way. So then we're going to talk about Peter Corral. He is the uncle of Adam Corral, who owns The Nice Guy, where this whole incident happened, where there was weird fake bills that were handed over to Robert Shapiro, given during the criminal preliminary hearing, just weird shady stuff happening. But Peter Corral, so remember, he's the guy, he used to own 7 For All Mankind jeans, and I Googled it, and he sold it in the last decade or something like that for $775 million. So he's basically pretty much a billionaire, and he's partners with the Drizzes. And Maurice says that he's been friends with Peter for about 30 plus years. They grew up together, they're partners, all that stuff. So Peter, we're definitely keeping an eye on, because when this all happened, you can't be an owner of a Blaze Pizza franchise location if you're a felon, convicted felon, which all the Drizzes are. So they sold about 11 locations, which each one should, if you're selling it, it should be about $1 to $1.5 million each. And when they had to get rid of these, because they can't be felon owners and because they have to prepare to pay all their victims, they sold all of those locations, no, not for $11 to $15 million, which you would think. They sold the entire thing to Peter Corral for about $110,000. So really, really, really shady stuff that this man's name's all over it. So Maurice says that he actually says under oath that he was not necessarily fired by Blaze Pizza, which is interesting. Blaze Pizza, if you'd like to answer and explain all this and how all of these franchise locations were sold for pennies, pretty much, that's a really, really, really big question that Blaze Pizza needs to answer publicly, along with an apology. So Maurice then says, and I quote, "We told Peter what happened." This is like right after the incident happened. He says, "We told Corral what happened. He was satisfied with our answer. He was okay with it." Also under oath, Maurice says that Peter Corral was present at their birthday dinner the night in 2015, and they claim that he wasn't at The Nice Guy, so can't be a witness. Next, Maurice is asked about one of the other defendants in the case, one of the men who is on the security footage doing horrific things. And this is William Aubrey Jolson. And I haven't gone into detail about him much, and I will in the next part, but his identity was hidden for 2-3 years after the incident, hidden by all the defendants, his best friends. And he was allowed to skip the entire criminal part and skip the statute of limitations and being charged with attempted unaliving, being charged with like all of those charges. So he was able to skip that, but he definitely owes us millions for the civil. And Maurice Driz is asked about William Jolson, and he says, I like him very much. I'm going to get into so much crazy stuff about this guy soon, so just buckle up. Next, Maurice was asked who was present at the Nice Guy where the incident happened that night. And he names his son, Sean Driz, and one of Sean's best friends, William Jolson. He also names Alex Derville, who is now an attorney in Los Angeles. Maurice also names a man here in the center of this picture named Jimmy Esbag. I found a lot of stuff about them, by the way. Jimmy likes to post a lot of pictures of his Rolls Royces and his private jet that has his initials on the side. They do business together. Maurice also names another witness. He says that this was his friend that came with him that night, Serena Singe. I don't know how to pronounce her last name, and I don't care. But look how old she is, and you know, she came as the friend of Maurice. And if you remember in my previous parts where the LAPD told us that the Drizzes, they were able to get their cell phone numbers so fast is because they had caught them, found out through a madam that night of their birthday, the Drizzes were staying at a brothel type place in Bel Air, a place that had been busted for that by the cops many times. We were told by the LAPD. This is crazy. Maurice then says under oath that he and his team, Shapiro, whoever, that they have, he says, we have a statement from Serena of what she saw, and he offers to give it to my attorneys. It turned out later we proved he was lying, that there was no statement. So I'm working on getting my attorneys to, I'm pushing and pushing and pushing to get them to start filing perjury charges against the, you know, the dozens and dozens and dozens of lies that I've caught so far. But he claims that she had a statement that was totally saying the defendants, you know, were good people, whatever type of thing, were innocent. And there was never a statement from Serena Singe. Let me remind you also that Maurice says, and I quote, she watched the argument, the thing that started with the valet that started the entire, you know, melee of attempted unalivings, and she was never deposed. Then Maurice starts to describe his injuries, which sound very similar to the ones that I actually had in real life. He says that his face was broken in 2 places, but he didn't go and get medical help, and they never called the cops or anything. And that he never saw his son, Sean Driz, fighting with the TMZ paparazzi, which they were all in the same area. They totally saw it. Maurice also claims that he was hit by a mysterious anonymous puncher that kind of just came out of the shadows, and that he was on the ground for a minute, dizzy and bleeding, kind of like what I actually was. Maurice also referred to us, the plaintiffs, who had, you know, many broken bones, intestines removed in an emergency surgery. I had a traumatic brain injury. Another plaintiff had permanent loss of hearing in one side of his head. He calls us, and I quote, the so-called victims. Maurice also claimed that he never struck anyone, which would go with the altered transcripts that I discovered from the preliminary hearing, where my star witness described in detail about a woman, Anne Green, being pummeled while she was unconscious on the ground, and he tried to pull Maurice off of my body. And those statements were changed in the transcript later on, and the notes were stolen and destroyed, whatever, one of the two or both. But he pretty much, the story that they're going is he never hit anybody. Oh, and then he also said that there was only 4 of them and 16 of us. So our group of 4 and their group of 16, suddenly the numbers switched. They literally just stealing our entire narrative and story and using it as their own. Okay, I'm going to continue this for one more part.